Am I on yet? Okay, how's it going, everybody? My name is Paul G. Newton. I am generally the editor and producer of the show. There's no one here today, so it's up to me to give you the instructions. Now, what I'm going to cover today is more about photography. I am not an astrophotography expert or guru, but we do have the PMC IXOS 100 GT here. And so if you're going to do any kind of astrophotography or anything like that, you can do it without a motorized tripod. But if you want to get longer exposures, the only way to do it really is to use one of these, because as you know, you'll blur it out. But you have to have the nice little adapter here, stick your camera on, put it on the IXOS 100, which is really, it's made for telescopes, but it's also made for DSLRs. And there's there's a little bit of a disagreement, I would say, internal. Kent thinks it was made for the cameras first and then the telescope second. I think the other side of the story is that we made it for both at once, which is probably true. This particular deal here is, I like it. I haven't got to use it very much, but I got it called up on the pad just to show you what it does. If you haven't seen one of these before, which I know you have, but whatever. So it's always fun to watch it move, right? Let's see here, and we want to, I'm always messing with this thing. So catalog, I'm going to go to the sun. Where's the sun? There's the sun. And as we go to the camera 2, you can see this is going to sit on the sun. Of course, you have to have the polar alignment and things like that. And when it comes to polar alignment, I refer you back to Kent's videos. We're not necessarily going to show you that here. Kent is the expert. I am an expert when it comes to terrestrial photography. You want to do landscapes, you want to do photographs of people, cars, depth of field, whatever you want to do, that's what I do for a living. So, and of course I make videos and cameras. So if we can go back to camera 1, let's see here. I'm going to park this dude. Main? No, we don't want to go to main. We want to go to settings, right? Settings. As you can see, I'm not that good at it yet. So there we go. But these are available. We still have some of these, right, Noah?
Oh yeah, lots of them.
We got lots of these. These are really good. They're fairly inexpensive if you consider how much everything costs these days. And of course you have to have an iPad or a tablet or a computer. It will not work on the phones just yet, but that's coming soon. So, but what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about photography, actual photography. And yes, I'm supposed to turn this off, so I'll turn the battery off here. The good news is you won't burn out the motors if you're messing around with it, because of the way it's built. This is an old Canon that we've got right here. This old Canon has everything on it that any of the other cameras would do. What we use here in the studio is A7 IIIs. They're really good for what we're doing like now. They're not the ideal camera because you can burn out the sensor eventually. But the new cameras, the new Sonys, the A7 IV, I believe it is, they have a full-size HDMI, which makes them so much easier to deal with. But anyway, this is the old Canon. It's a full frame. We used to take our product shots with it. It's not anywhere near the size of camera that we need now. We have a 32 megapixel. I think this is a 12 megapixel camera. Some of these lenses that you'll see have stabilization built in on them. And if you're shooting long exposures, if you have a lens that has auto stabilization on it, and you're taking long exposures and you're using one of these, I would turn that off. And the reason I turn it off is because it uses a little bit of it'll wiggle inside of it, and it'll distort the image, and you don't want that, especially if you're taking shots, long exposures. You don't want that happening because it'll end up blurring your image. So always turn your image stabilization off when you're taking long exposures. Some cameras automatically turn it off, and that's the good news, is that the cameras are smart enough now, especially the new ones, that they automatically turn it off. These cameras, these older cameras, however, are not going to do that. in every occasion, on every instance. Also, your autofocus, manual focus. Anytime you're doing long exposures, you want to go into manual focus. Never use it on auto. You guys know that, I'm pretty sure. But one of the things I wanted to talk about today about cameras is a little bit different than astrophotography. If you're shooting, for example, a landscape, and Noah, if we can pull up the first landscape picture with the giant moon over Denver, you want to pull that one up? You'll see a lot of times that these photographs have large giant moons in them, and they have large giant cities. Can you do it? There you go, you got it. Yeah, there is a long delay on for what I see, because I'm not seeing directly on what's on his computer. You notice the moon is huge in this photograph, and we'll just leave that for a little while. The moon and the mountains behind the city are huge. They're actually not quite that big, but the reason they're that large is because of an optical illusion. If you look at it with your eye, you're going to notice that the moon looks like that, or somewhat similar. But if you take a regular camera, 35 millimeter, 50 millimeter, 75 millimeter, 85 millimeter, and you take that picture, that moon is tiny. And the reason it's tiny is because that's what it actually looks like. If you want to get that moon, this is one of the coolest things that I've ever found. If you want to get that moon in your shot, or the mountains be huge like that in your shot, you have to use a 300 millimeter or larger lens. Noah, if you could come back to me, and then let's put up that first lens photo. This is a G-Master Sony lens. It actually, you put your camera on the back of the lens, and you mount the lens to your tripod. Yeah, that's a good one. This one has autofocus and all that other good stuff on it. And if you're doing snapshots, you want to have your shutter speed higher, especially if you're shooting landscapes. Now, the best part about landscape photography is that, going to be, Ken N says, Dangerous Paul is in the house, it's going to be a good day. Maybe, I don't know. I've already been banned off here once, so let's see. When you're doing landscape photography, if you could come back to me, Noah. When you're doing landscape photography, what you want to make sure is that it's different kind of mindset than astrophotography. You want to have your aperture to be really, really fast, or really, really slow. You don't want to have a big aperture on it. And the reason for that is because of the refracted light, the unfocused light. And Noah, can we go to the one with the F1 through F8, just to kind of show exactly what I'm talking about?
Is it the one that's from the side?
No, it's the one with all the different lenses on it. Do you see it?
That might be further down.
Yeah, may have to go down a little bit. Yeah, that's the lens that I'm seeing there.
It's coming now.
Okay, so you see this, it has F1, and it shows that it's a large opening. It's letting in the most light. And then the F8 is closed down. What happens is, whenever you have it open all the way, you're letting in more light. However, you're letting in unfocused light onto your sensor. And the unfocused light causes your bokeh. It causes the background to be blurry and have those nice feel behind it. That's great, but if you want a super sharp image, if you're doing landscape photography, minimum you want to shoot is at an f8, maybe more like an f10, f15. The reason you want to go that far is because you need to make sure that all that light is in focus. If it's not in focus, your landscape's not going to, it's going to be, when you crop in, let's say you need to crop in because you found something inside the frame that you really want to show off, or you see that you would have got a better photograph if your composition was a little tighter, for example. If it's not at an f8, f10, f15, then what's going to happen is you're going to have a blurry subject, and it's not going to be as crisp. And this is where the full frame comes in handy. If you're shooting an APS-C, which is a micro four thirds, it may not be so great for this particular, for doing landscapes. I think now with the sensor sizes, if you could come back to me, Noah. I think now with the sensor sizes up as where they are, I think even on an APS-C you can get a really, really crisp and sharp, deep picture for your landscape photography. But if you're using a 32 megapixel or a 50 or a 60 megapixel camera as we have now just for photography, close that iris down, and being that it's daytime, your ISO will probably be on the very bottom. You will still probably need an ND filter, especially if you're shooting outside during the day. If you're shooting outside during the night, well, it becomes a little bit more difficult because you do have to raise that ISO. But when you're using the newer technology cameras, you're going to find that the A7 III and up, and the newest Canons and the newest Nikons and the newest Fujis, they're all going to have a really good noise ratio at about 2500. Sometimes their native ISO is actually 800, and then it jumps up again to 2500, and that's the individual specs on your camera that you'll be able to read in there. So if you're looking to shoot the stars in this configuration on one of these, which is what I will be doing, hopefully in the near future, with the 300 millimeter lens, which I have, which this is not, then to be able to get that crisp photo, you jack that ISO up and you make sure you read your specs of your camera. Most cameras will tell you on their page what their native ISO is, and sometimes they'll have dual or triple native ISOs, and always shooting raw, uncompressed. You want to try to keep it as clean as possible, and then of course make sure your white balance is correct. I know in RAW it doesn't really matter as much for your white balance, but especially if shooting in video, you want to make sure your white balance is correct, because every time you correct it, just think of it as the old film stock. Every time you correct it, you lose data, and you enhance some data. You make it more. So what you can end up having in the long run is your reds are too saturated while your greens are barely there. And then you have to go into Photoshop, and the more you do it, the more destructive it is, and you don't want to do that if you can help it. Let's see here. Just reading the comments. All right. It looks here, Alba Astrophotography, looking forward to it. Nice. Norm Hughes, cool. We'll be waiting. Alba, all right. Not a whole lot of discussion, and that's cool because, whatever. But when you're shooting portraits, for example, if you want to go back further and shoot human beings, the best lens is going to be an 85, but you're going to stand really far away. As a portrait photographer, I'm always using an 85, but you got to have the right lights and Rembrandt lighting, things like that. There's all sorts of tutorials and different things that talk about noise and the way it's correctly shot. And if no, could we go to the web page real quick, just to kind of show them that? You can always find on the internet all sorts of different people that will help you to understand exactly what's going on in your camera. For example, this gentleman here, this is off his website. And if we could scroll down, he's talking about astrophotography here. And so he's actually talking about noise. And if you go over to put it in the preview window, Noah, and then grab the little deal to the right of the screen, the little pull down, you should be able to pull it down. Do you understand?
Oh, I see it.
Yeah. And he's talking about noise in camera, and you'll see how he's kind of showing you where the noise starts to begin inside the alpha. Keep going down. He's got some different explanations here. Keep an eye on my time.
Where do you want me to stop on?
Keep going down. I'm way behind, so right about there with the different ISOs. There we go. Up. Now you're going the wrong way again. Right there.
I don't know where an ISO is.
Where it has all the 3400, 100, right there. The 800, 1600, 3200, 6400. Right in there. You can see and it went away. You
Hang on, I'm looking for, I'm having trouble with the slider now.
Yeah, the slider's giving you trouble. So you can see on this, whenever he gets it pulled up, the different ISOs and how much noise it puts in. And this is on this specific camera. And Sony's no longer known as a star eater as much as it was because their algorithm's getting really, really good. So you will lose some stars inside of a Sony, but there'll be very faint stars and you might not notice them anyway. Yeah, right there is where I wanted it. So you can see 800 ISO is going to give you darkness all the way to 25,600, but you're introducing a ton of noise at 25,600. Really, the Sony is going to be good at 3,200 to 6,400. That's where you want to stick with those cameras, and so that's why you need a little bit longer exposure and one of these mounts. If you could come back to me, Noah, that'd be great. I'm trying to direct it and be on the show. Now, if you're wanting to shoot any more of your, like I said, the 80 millimeter is a great portrait photography lens. You want to get that as not all the way down, like a 5.6 f-stop. Your aperture is 5.6, because that bokeh behind is what you want. But if you go too low, like I was saying before, if you go too low, you have a lot of unfocused light coming in from the back, hitting that sensor, and it's because it's unfocused. Think about it. You guys would know this better than most people. Those photons are just moving everywhere, and they're blurring this, which is supposed to be in focus, because they're in there with it. And while we don't think about it that way, that's the way it works. If you take a photograph at 50 ISO or 100 ISO with lights like this apertures that I'm using, at 1.5, because I have lenses here because the video, they go to 1.5. And then you take that same picture and you grab it at a 7 or an 8. The one that's at 7 and 8 will be crisper in the details of your face and clothing of whatever your focus is. But if you dump it down to 1.5, you got this beautiful bokeh back here, nice and blurry. But if you go and crop in and you look at the detail of the nose, like at an f8, f7, f5, you're going to notice the pores on my face. But when you start dumping that f-stop down into the ones and twos, these pores are going to start to disappear. And that may be what you're after. We used to put stockings in front of our cameras to give it this kind of silky look. A lot of old magazines from the 50s and 60s and 70s, whatever they were doing a stylistic photo of people, that's what they would do. They would put a little stocking over it and shoot through the stocking. It cuts down the light, but it also makes everything this little heavenly glow. And you can buy filters for that that are going to do way better than a stocking that we make now, because the technology, we make smaller and smaller stuff. Back in the 50s, we couldn't get that small. Thank you, Harold Locke, for seeing the. Thank you for your comment. So anyway, when it comes to the cameras, doing astrophotography, if you're going to stack, I wouldn't worry so much about the technology behind your camera. I would look into getting a newer one as you can. I am not speaking to the dedicated cameras that are only for astrophotography. I know nothing about those. I'm speaking to just SLRs and DSLRs. The single lens reflex is the mirrorless camera. The dual lens reflex is the old school type stuff. Everybody's going to an SLR now, which is the mirrorless. I would definitely look into those as far as dealing with that, and then learning how to use your camera. If you want to take a photo of a flower or a bee, you also have to worry about your shutter speed. During the day, if you don't have an ND filter, you can keep your f-stop down if you wanted to at a 5 and get that beautiful bokeh, depending on your lens. But if it's just too bright and you don't have an ND filter, you can raise that shutter speed up all the way to 250. I think 125 to 150 to 200, if you're going to shoot sports, that's where you want it, because it's going to freeze that action but give you just a touch little blur to give you that feel of motion. I I had some water photos that I had called up, no, but I don't think I got transferred over. No, they did not. So if you take your camera, if you want to do a little experiment that would be really interesting, just so you can find out yourself, because I always found that learning is somebody kind of gives you a roundabout and you go do it yourself. You learn so much more when you apply a little bit of knowledge to real world playing. What you do, just go out and get a water hose, or summertime now here in the United States, get a water hose or a sprinkler, and then take your camera out and put that shutter speed on 250 at a low ISO, with and whatever you want to do, just make it. As long as that shutter speed's at 250, take a picture. Then take that shutter speed and dump it down to 60 frames per second, 60th of a second. Sorry, I'm thinking film. And then shoot it, and look at the difference between the two. If you want to shoot waterworks, you want to go out and shoot a fountain, you don't want to hit that fountain with the 250 or higher, or even 100 and higher shutter speed. You want to hit it at a 1/60th or 1/30th, or even slower if you really want to get artistic about it. If you hit it at 1/200th, it's going to freeze that water, and those water droplets are going to be frozen, and it's not going to have any movement at all. When you hit the 160, it's going to blur across, and it's going to make this beautiful looking little waterfall that comes down. And these are just the little things that you do with your camera. And I suggest, and I've suggested this to Kent and everyone else, I suggest that get to know your camera. If you're going to do astrophotography, get to know your camera and what it can do and how you can run it. Because it's way better to get the photograph you're looking for in camera than it is to Photoshop it later. And that's why whenever Kent's like, well, hey, we stack this and we do all that, I know, and I get it, and I understand that you have 15,000 shots, you turn them into one shot and you've got the most detail. But I'm kind of an old school guy, and I enjoy getting it right in camera. So I do everything that I possibly can to make sure I get it right in camera. And that's why I think this is a great deal. The mount for shooting sky or the moon, because you can only get maybe 15 seconds of an exposure before you start getting really blurry. And even then, even if you're shooting for more than a second, it's still blurring if you're not moving with it. But if you're moving with it, because you're technically not moving it, the camera's not moving according to the universe at that point, if you're technically not moving with it, that star or that nebula is going to be so much more crisp. You also want to watch your white balance if you're not shooting in RAW. If your white balance is wrong for whatever you're shooting, that will also cause your image to be fuzzy or blurry or have a little bit of, it won't be as crisp. Even in RAW, I found that even in RAW, that if you can get your white balance close in, and I know it doesn't really count because you can adjust the white balance because it's recording all the information, but I still say I'm such a perfectionist that I see just a little bit of fuzziness when I don't white balance. And it may just be internally in my head, it may be I'm just thinking that possibly this is what's happening, and I'm not thinking correctly, so who knows. But we're going to go to Amazon, and I'm going to do even more of this and babble on about cameras for about an hour. So follow us on Amazon. Go over there, and we're going to start over, sure, but I'm also going to talk about different equipment, different things to do, different things to try. My name's Paul G. Newton, and you put my lower chyron on there, Noah. I just want to see it. I want to see my name come up for once, since nobody ever knows who I am. Who is this guy? I don't have a clue. I'm just goofy, and I get banned a lot, but that's why. Oh, there it is. Yes, I'm an Emmy-winning editor. I'm an award-winning screenwriter, an award-winning filmmaker, an award-winning television maker, an award-winning photographer, and I got about a page of my resume that just lists my awards. So yes, I do know what I'm doing. Unfortunately, I know what I'm doing. So anyway, I guess I'll see you guys on the other side. Yeah, get rid of it. 1.
It's going.
I can't see it from here. You got me back up.
Oh, how did that?
You got to end the show.